Dog barks at a coffin during a funeral. When a man asks why, the priest becomes nervous. A cold wind swept through the courtyard of St. Bartholomew's Church in Glendale, California, rustling the ribbons on the flower arrangements as mourners gathered in hushed sadness. Among the black-clad figures stood a man named Vincent and a restless German shepherd named Rocky, who kept tugging at his leash, eyes fixed on the mahogany coffin at the front of the chapel. When the organ notes ceased and the priest raised his hands to offer final prayers, a sudden bark echoed through the church. Heads turned sharply. The priest's lips twitched as he hesitated. Why was the dog barking so furiously? And why did that question make the priest so nervous? The mid-morning sun filtered through the large stained glass windows at St. Bartholomew's Church, casting uneven patches of color on the worn wooden pews. Motes of dust shimmered in the shafts of light as people filed in quietly, offering each other solemn nods and hushed condolences. The air smelled faintly of lilies and candle wax. A black casket, closed for reasons never fully explained, dominated the altar area, framed by an abundance of white roses. A stark final tribute to Michael Alderman, a man both loved and, as some whispered, burdened by secrets. Vincent Moretti was Michael's longtime friend. He remembered how, during lazy Sundays, Michael used to bring Rocky, a scrappy German shepherd, over to Vincent's small house near the Glendale foothills. Rocky, still just a pup then, would wobble around, sniffing everything in sight, tail wagging with irrepressible joy. Michael would talk about his big dreams, founding a community outreach program, establishing scholarships for local high school students, always envisioning ways to give back to Glendale. He had that kind of heart, generous, visionary, and determined to leave the world better than he found it. Now, just 4 years after those sunny afternoons, Vincent found himself staring at the polished casket in disbelief. Michael was gone, or so everyone said. The official story was a brain aneurysm that struck him unexpectedly in the middle of the night. Yet Vincent couldn't shake the dread that something more lay beneath the surface. Michael had been energetic, healthy, with an unbreakable will and a bustling schedule. It felt so abrupt, even unnatural. At Vincent's side, Rocky kept whimpering, pacing in circles, his nails clicking on the marble floor. Some guests moved to pet him or offer gentle reassurances, but the dog seemed fixated on the casket. More than fixated, disturbed. Every so often, Rocky let out a sharp bark that reverberated in the nearly silent church. It made Vincent uneasy. The dog was usually calm, rarely barking unless startled. So what was wrong now? When Father Lawrence entered, eyes downcast in a show of respect, he commenced the service by crossing himself, offering a few words of consolation about life's fragility and the promise of eternal rest. However, his voice trembled as he spoke, especially whenever he glanced at Rocky. A fine line of sweat gleamed on his brow despite the church's cool interior. Vincent narrowed his eyes in curiosity. He tried to dismiss it as nerves. Funerals were emotionally charged events after all, but a whisper of suspicion coiled in his mind. As the pews filled, Vincent felt the press of sorrow all around him. Michael's aunt dabbed at her tears with a handkerchief. His cousins quietly consoled each other in the back row. Claire Winters, Michael's fiancée, sat alone in the front row, her entire body trembling. Even from a distance, Vincent could see how her hands shook in her lap. He ached for her. She had pinned all her hopes on a future life with Michael. Wedding plans, honeymoon ideas, maybe children someday. And now, all that was shattered. Vincent took a seat beside Claire, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. She nodded, her eyes rimmed red, tears rolling freely down her cheeks. Rocky stood at Vincent's feet, letting out another anxious bark when a burst of organ music filled the church. The sudden sharp note startled the entire congregation. Claire's head jerked up, eyes wide, focusing on the dog. She opened her mouth to ask a question, but Father Lawrence spoke over her, raising his voice just enough to quell the commotion. "My dear friends," he said, clutching his silver cross, "we are gathered here to celebrate the life of Michael Alderman. He was a charitable soul, a wonderful son, fiancé, and friend to so many. The priest's voice wavered. Though his loss is sudden, we must find solace in the knowledge that he rests in the Lord's eternal embrace. Another bark from Rocky cut through the hush, forcing Father Lawrence to clear his throat nervously. Vincent caught a fleeting glimpse of panic in the priest's eyes, like someone whose well-rehearsed lines risked unraveling at any moment. After the organ music resumed for a final hymn, Claire began to sob again, and a wave of sorrow seemed to ripple through the pews. Pallbearers rose to gather around the coffin, preparing it for the procession to the cemetery. That was when Vincent noticed something unusual. Father Lawrence stepped back too quickly, nearly stumbling over his own feet, as if he didn't want to be too close to the casket. Curiosity gnawed at Vincent. He led Rocky closer to the coffin so the dog could sniff it, hoping it might calm him. But Rocky's barking grew louder. Father Lawrence's hands visibly shook as he attempted to maintain composure. Finally, unable to restrain himself, Vincent quietly sidled up to the priest. "Father," Vincent said, voice low, "do you know why Rocky won't stop barking?" He gestured toward the dog, who was now whining and pawing at the coffin. "He's never done anything like this before. It's almost like he can sense something." For a moment, Father Lawrence didn't answer, his eyes locked on the dog's insistent paws. The color in the priest's face began to drain. Perhaps the animal is just grieving," he stammered, "or maybe the strong odor of flowers is confusing him." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Rocky's not upset by flowers. He's used to them. I've brought him to gardens, to farmers' markets. He's fine around new scents. And I've never known him to bark at a coffin, not even at other funerals." He softened his tone. "Is there something else you might be hiding, Father?" The priest looked at him sharply. His lips parted as if to respond, but then he turned away, rushing to lead the casket procession. Vincent stood rooted, unsettled by the priest's behavior. There was a significance to Rocky's barking, he was sure of it. And for some reason, Father Lawrence did not want to talk about it. Outside, the funeral procession wound along the cobblestone path toward the small graveyard behind St. Bartholomew's. Towering cypress trees offered dappled shade, and the Los Angeles skyline in the distance seemed surreal beneath the bright, cloudless sky. Mourners fanned themselves against the heat, each step accompanied by hushed sobs or subdued sniffles. Vincent noticed that Father Lawrence no longer walked at the front of the procession. He had drifted off to the side, as though wanting to blend into the crowd and not draw attention. Something was clearly wrong. The image of the nervous priest stayed with Vincent, fueling his determination to figure out what was happening. By the time they reached the burial plot, a rectangle of freshly dug earth lined with synthetic grass, the funeral attendants gently set the coffin onto a lowering device. Claire was inconsolable, pressing her face into a damp handkerchief. Family members took seats in neat rows of folding chairs, heads bowed. Rocky, once again, began to bark. A mournful, anguished sound this time, as if he were howling at the sorrow gathered in that small patch of ground. Father Lawrence cleared his throat and spoke about how Michael had been a pillar of the Glendale community. He thanked everyone for their support and asked them to pray for his soul. But the priest's words lacked the calming, assured tone that Vincent had come to expect from him in times of grief. Instead, his voice seemed hurried, uncertain. Before he finished the final blessing, he said something unusual. "We lay him to rest here, even though his time was cut short." He paused, shot a guilty glance at Rocky, then continued. "His time was cut short. May God bring him peace." Vincent's pulse sped up. What had Father Lawrence almost revealed? When the ceremony concluded, people began to disperse, offering Claire last-minute condolences. Vincent walked with her, gently guiding her to a bench beneath a spreading oak tree. Rocky followed, whimpering softly, head lowered. A swirl of uneasy thoughts crowded Vincent's mind, from the priest's strange slips to the abruptness of Michael's passing. "Vincent," Claire whispered, voice trembling, "why did it happen so fast? Michael was fine. He was happy. We were planning our wedding. Vincent took her hand, tears moistening his own eyes. I wish I knew, but that's what we have to find out. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Father Lawrence, who approached them with halting steps. He offered a stiff, formal bow, avoiding direct eye contact with Vincent and looking warily at Rocky. Claire tried to stand, but the priest motioned for her to stay seated. You've both been through so much, Father Lawrence said quietly, his words meant for them yet lacking the warmth one would expect from a spiritual guide. I'm sorry for your loss. Before Vincent could voice his suspicions, the priest held out a small envelope. Michael left this for you, Claire. He asked me to deliver it, if anything were ever to happen to him. Father Lawrence swallowed hard, as if a lump were lodged in his throat. I'm fulfilling that request now. Claire's eyes flickered with alarmed confusion. She took the envelope, carefully sliding out a single folded sheet of paper. Vincent craned his neck to see, but Father Lawrence quickly cleared his throat, stepping forward as though to dissuade them from reading it in public. It might be best to open that letter in private, Father Lawrence said, his voice unsteady. In the sanctuary, or perhaps at your home, somewhere quiet so you can absorb its contents without interruption. Claire hesitated, but then she resealed the letter. Oh, okay, she stammered, glancing at Vincent for support. Before Vincent could ask further questions, Father Lawrence made a hurried excuse about duties at the rectory and darted away. This time, Vincent did not let him escape so easily. He rose, gave Claire a reassuring squeeze on her arm, and whispered, I'll be right back. Then he followed the priest, who was weaving through the small clusters of mourners. Rocky padded silently at Vincent's side, as though sensing his mission. When Vincent finally caught up to Father Lawrence near the heavy wooden doors of the church, he touched the priest's elbow. Father, wait. I need to talk to you. The priest turned, eyes wild with tension. The handshake he offered was jittery. Yes, my son. Vincent looked him square in the face. You're hiding something, aren't you? Michael's death, Rocky's barking, your behavior. You're not telling us everything. Father Lawrence's lower lip quivered, and for a moment Vincent thought the priest might break down entirely. But then the older man steeled himself. Mr. Moretti, my duty is to fulfill the last requests of the departed and provide solace to the living. I have said all that needs to be said. That's not true, Vincent pressed. Rocky doesn't bark at coffins. He's never done that. He's reacting to something specific, and you looked terrified every time he did. Why? A flicker of guilt crawled across Father Lawrence's features. Then he shook his head, turning away. I am bound by certain confessions that cannot be revealed. If Michael had secrets, only God and Michael himself can tell you. With that, Father Lawrence slipped through the church doors, leaving Vincent bewildered and more determined than ever. That evening, Vincent and Claire sat at her kitchen table, a small, cozy space with yellowed wallpaper and a vase of wilting tulips Michael had bought just days before his death. The unopened letter lay between them, as imposing as any coffin. Rocky rested near their feet, head on his paws, occasionally letting out a low, mournful whine. Shall we read it? Vincent asked gently. Claire inhaled shakily. I'm scared. What if... I don't know. What if it changes everything I thought I knew about Michael? Vincent squeezed her hand. He loved you. That was real. Nothing in this letter can take that away. She nodded, tears brimming, and finally tore open the envelope. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Vincent leaned in, scanning the words along with her. My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, something has happened to me. I hope you find the strength to continue living and loving without me, because I know your heart is big enough for that. And I hope you remember me not just as the man who proposed to you, but as someone who always wanted to help others in Glendale. There is something you should know. I've recently discovered wrongdoing at the very heart of our community, corruption that reaches higher than I ever imagined. I stumbled onto documents pointing to embezzlement and blackmail involving certain individuals who hold positions of authority. I'd rather not name them in this letter, but I've entrusted evidence to someone I trust. Father Lawrence, if I'm gone, it may be because I got too close to the truth. I urge you to speak with Father Lawrence and find the documents. They must be handed to the right people, those who can bring justice without fear of reprisal. But please be careful. I can't bear the thought of you being hurt. Love always, Michael. When Claire finished reading, her hand shot to her mouth. Tears welled up as she stared at Vincent. He was in danger. Corruption, embezzlement, and he trusted the priest? Vincent's mind reeled with questions. Michael's abrupt death, Father Lawrence's nervousness, Rocky's persistent barking at the coffin. It all felt connected. I need to talk to Father Lawrence again, he said grimly. Michael said he entrusted the evidence to him. Either the priest is helping us or he's involved. Claire looked uncertain. He seemed so scared at the funeral. Maybe he's being threatened, or maybe he's part of it. Oh, Vincent, what do we do? Vincent stood from the table, casting a protective glance at Rocky. The dog looked up, ears perking, as if sensing the tension in the air. We find out the truth, Vincent said. I won't let Michael's name go down without answers. The next morning, Vincent left Rocky at home with Claire for safety and drove to the rectory at St. Bartholomew's Church. The day was unseasonably warm, sunlight bouncing off the church's stained glass windows, creating tiny rainbows on the sidewalk. He found Father Lawrence in his small, book-lined office, slumped behind a heavy wooden desk. Papers, prayer books, and an ancient-looking Bible cluttered the surface. When Vincent knocked, the priest jumped up, nearly knocking over a half-drunk cup of coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, with dark circles under them. It looked as though he had not slept all night. May I come in? Vincent asked politely. Father Lawrence motioned half-heartedly to a chair. Vincent closed the office door behind him, ensuring privacy. The tension in the room was palpable. We need to talk, Vincent said, leveling a firm gaze. I read Michael's letter. He mentioned corruption, said you have the evidence. At once, Father Lawrence went pale. He carefully set his coffee cup on the desk to avoid spilling. I was afraid of this, he muttered. He took a shaky breath and stared at his folded hands. Yes, I do have documents from Michael. I didn't know how to proceed after his passing. He swallowed hard. He brought them to me about 2 weeks ago, asking for my help. He was terrified but determined. He said if something happened to him, I was to deliver them to the authorities. Why haven't you? Vincent asked, his frustration audible. Michael's gone. People are suspicious. We deserve the truth. Father Lawrence rubbed his temples. I was scared. The people implicated are powerful. One is a local official who's done great philanthropy work through the Glendale City Council. Another is an investor in community projects. He's well connected and could ruin me, ruin this church. He let out a shuddering breath. I'm not proud of my fear, but it overwhelmed me, especially after Michael's sudden death. I worried that if I went to the authorities, I'd be next. Vincent leaned forward, fists balled. And you didn't think that whoever was responsible would be watching you anyway, or that they'd go after Claire? Tears gathered in the priest's eyes, and Vincent realized that for all his misgivings, Father Lawrence was just a man caught in a situation beyond his control. I never wanted any of this, the priest whispered. I only wanted to help people find God's peace. Now I feel like a traitor to Michael's cause. Vincent softened his tone. Father, we can make this right. Where are the documents now? Father Lawrence reached beneath his desk and withdrew a locked metal box. They're in here, he said, tapping the lid. I keep it hidden in the rectory's safe. But we can't just walk into the Glendale Police Department. The corruption might reach into law enforcement too. Michael warned me about that. We need someone above suspicion, maybe from the FBI or a trustworthy organization. He handed Vincent a business card with a number scrawled on the back. Michael wanted me to contact a friend of his in the Department of Justice, a man named Special Agent Henry Caldwell. He said to mention the code name Sunrise Initiative. Vincent studied the card. All right, that's our next step. He looked up, determination blazing in his eyes. Father, I understand your fear, but we can't wait any longer. The priest nodded, a measure of relief softening his worried features. I'll go with you. We'll contact Agent Caldwell, but please, let's be discreet. That evening, Father Lawrence and Vincent planned to meet in the rectory to phone Special Agent Caldwell. Claire decided to stay at Vincent's house with Rocky for safety. While driving, Vincent's heart pounded with anxious adrenaline. He kept checking his rearview mirror, half expecting to see a suspicious car following him. Every flash of headlights made him tense. He parked behind the church. The rectory was a modest two-story building, its windows lit with a warm glow. Vincent walked up the narrow path, leaves crunching underfoot. A faint hint of jasmine hung in the air, remnants of the flower garden Michael once helped plant. The memory brought a pang of grief to Vincent's chest. He knocked on the rectory's door. Father Lawrence opened almost immediately, ushering him inside. I was worried you might not come, the priest admitted, locking the door behind them. I said I would, Vincent replied. Let's call Caldwell now. They went into the small living room, where a rotary phone sat on an end table beside a worn couch. Father Lawrence handed Vincent the phone, gave him the card, and retreated to the kitchen to retrieve the lockbox. The tension in the air was thick. Vincent dialed the number with shaking fingers, each ring amplifying his nervousness. Finally, a brisk, authoritative voice answered. This is Caldwell, the man said, his tone crisp. Vincent introduced himself and relayed the code name Sunrise Initiative. Caldwell fell silent, and for a moment Vincent worried he'd hung up. Then Caldwell spoke again, his voice lower and guarded. How did you get that name? Michael Alderman gave it to me. He said you were the one to trust. Michael Alderman, Caldwell echoed, his voice tinged with sadness. He reached out to me about potential corruption in Glendale. I was waiting for more evidence, but he stopped contacting me. I feared the worst. Vincent swallowed hard. He's dead, he said softly. Caldwell sighed. I'm sorry to hear that. Do you have any documents he left behind? Yes, Vincent replied, his voice firm now. We do, and we're ready to hand them over, but we need protection. Stay where you are, Caldwell instructed. I'll come to you. You said you're at St. Bartholomew's rectory? Don't leave. Lock the doors. Don't talk to anyone. Vincent agreed and hung up. Father Lawrence approached, carrying the metal box with trembling hands. We'll do this, Vincent said. For Michael. They sat in tense silence, waiting. Every creak of the old rectory floors sounded like a threat. The only light in the room came from a small lamp, casting long shadows on the walls. An hour passed with excruciating slowness. Vincent checked his watch repeatedly. Where was Caldwell? Suddenly, a loud crash shook the door. Father Lawrence leapt to his feet, eyes wide with terror. Footsteps pounded on the porch. Another crash and the doorframe splintered. Two men in dark suits burst in, their faces masked by baseball caps pulled low. One pointed a gun at Vincent, the other at Father Lawrence. The intruder's voice was harsh. You have something that doesn't belong to you, he snarled. Vincent's heart thundered in his chest. Father Lawrence clutched the box against him as if it were his child. Stay back, the priest shouted, but his voice quivered. The gunman with the deeper voice sneered. Hand it over, he demanded, or I blow your brains out. For a second, Vincent considered lunging at the men, but with guns drawn, it was a losing gamble. Father Lawrence slowly extended the box. The intruder yanked it away. Open it, the shorter man snapped. With shaking hands, Father Lawrence fiddled with the key. The lock clicked, and the lid sprang open, revealing neatly stacked folders and a thumb drive. The intruders rummaged inside, scanning the top pages, eyes gleaming with malevolent satisfaction. What about the phone call? The short man demanded. We know you contacted Caldwell. Where is he? Vincent set his jaw, refusing to answer. The man stepped forward, pressing the barrel of his gun to Vincent's forehead. Fear made Vincent's knees threaten to buckle, but he held firm. The muzzle felt cold against his skin. Then came an unexpected sound from the porch, a deep bark that rattled the broken door. Rocky barreled into the room, hackles raised, teeth bared. In that split second of confusion, the short man spun, aiming at the dog. Vincent seized the moment, twisting the gun away from his own head. A shot rang out, deafening in the small space. Father Lawrence cried out, dropping to the floor. Rocky pounced on the gunman's arm, his powerful jaws clamping down. Vincent elbowed the taller intruder in the ribs. The man stumbled, losing his grip. Another shot fired wildly into the wall. Panic and adrenaline fueled Vincent as he wrestled the gun away. The intruder raked a hand across Vincent's face, leaving a sharp sting. But Vincent managed to slam the butt of the weapon against the man's temple. He collapsed in a heap. The short man screamed as Rocky continued to bite into his forearm. Finally, with blood streaming, the intruder kicked Rocky off and bolted from the rectory, clutching the stolen box. The battered man on the floor moaned, trying to rise, but Vincent kept him pinned, pressing the gun into his back. Police sirens screamed in the distance, lights flickering through the broken door. Vincent's eyes darted to Father Lawrence, who lay motionless, a dark stain spreading on his cassock. "Father," he shouted, moving to his side. "Hang on." Rocky, limping slightly, whimpered and pawed at Father Lawrence's shoulder. Vincent pressed a hand to the priest's wound, hoping to staunch the bleeding until help arrived. Moments later, uniformed officers and paramedics flooded the rectory, shining flashlights, taking in the shattered door and the moaning gunman. In their midst, a tall, stern-faced man in a suit stepped forward, Special Agent Henry Caldwell. Caldwell barked commands, calling for the paramedics. He knelt beside Father Lawrence with Vincent. "We need to get him to a hospital now," the agent said, pressing bandages to the wound. "He's losing blood fast." As they loaded Father Lawrence onto a stretcher, the priest opened his eyes briefly. He grabbed Vincent's sleeve. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for not delivering those documents myself." "Don't worry about that now," Vincent said, tears burning his eyes. "You're going to be okay." Father Lawrence squeezed Vincent's hand weakly, then passed out. 3 days later, Vincent paced the corridors of Adventist Health Glendale Hospital. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the hum of fluorescent lights had become familiar companions as he waited for news about Father Lawrence's recovery. Claire stood with him, holding a subdued Rocky on a leash. The dog's muzzle was bandaged from the scuffle, but otherwise he seemed ready to spring into action at any moment, scanning the hallway with alert eyes. At last, a nurse approached. "He's awake," she said kindly. "Room 314. Vincent and Claire hurried inside. Father Lawrence lay propped on pillows, his face pale but showing a faint smile of relief at seeing them. An IV line snaked into his arm, and the beep of monitors provided a steady reminder of his fragility. However, the spark in his eyes told Vincent that the priest's spirit remained unbroken. "How are you feeling, Father?" Vincent asked, pulling up a chair. Claire hovered, biting her lip anxiously. "Grateful to be alive," Father Lawrence said softly. "The bullet grazed my shoulder. Could have been much worse if you and Rocky hadn't fought back. Thank you." Claire rested a trembling hand on the priest's arm. "Michael would have wanted us to protect you," she murmured. "He believed in your goodness." A flicker of pain crossed Father Lawrence's features. "They got away with the evidence," he sighed. "I failed him." Before Vincent could respond, Special Agent Caldwell stepped into the room, a purposeful air about him. He carried a manila folder. "With all due respect, Father, you didn't fail anyone," he said. "When my agents searched the rectory after the attack, we found a hidden backup drive. Michael must have made duplicates." Father Lawrence's eyes widened. "Michael was thorough," he whispered, "always prepared." Caldwell nodded, offering a small smile. "Yes, he was. We're already analyzing the data. It outlines a web of corruption, embezzling from city funds, blackmail of local businesses, even threats to anyone who might speak out. Some high-profile names are on this list, and the Department of Justice is moving forward. Arrests are imminent." He placed a hand on Vincent's shoulder. "You did the right thing contacting me. I just wish we'd gotten here sooner." Vincent exhaled a long-held breath. A wave of relief tinged with sorrow washed over him. Michael's final wish was for this wrongdoing to come to light. Caldwell shook his head, sadness evident. He took big risks to help Glendale, perhaps bigger than any of us knew, but rest assured, justice will be served in his name. 2 weeks later, word spread across Glendale. A sweeping corruption scandal had broken out, leading to the arrest of several officials and influential investors. The local news covered the story, crediting an anonymous whistleblower who had clearly been Michael Alderman, along with undisclosed allies. Rumors flew, but no one could confirm the identity of the people behind the revelations. Vincent, Claire, Father Lawrence, and Caldwell kept a low profile, content to watch the city begin a slow process of healing and reform. Meanwhile, the congregation at St. Bartholomew's Church rallied around their wounded priest, thankful he was recovering. The bullet wound was healing well, though Father Lawrence was under doctor's orders to rest. He led Sunday Mass with his arm in a sling, his sermons charged with renewed conviction about moral integrity and courage in the face of injustice. Vincent, too, found himself changed by the ordeal. The near-death confrontation with the intruders, the heartbreak of losing Michael, and the revelation of deep-rooted corruption had rattled him. Yet it also strengthened his resolve to live a life guided by truth and compassion. He spent long hours talking with Claire about Michael's plans for the future. Scholarship funds, community gardens, youth outreach programs. They decided to move forward with those dreams in Michael's honor. Rocky, for his part, became something of a local hero. People at the church patted him on the head, called him a brave boy, and brought him treats. He no longer barked at coffins, he barked at criminals, and Vincent suspected that in his own canine way, Rocky understood the magnitude of what had happened. One bright Sunday morning, a small crowd gathered in the courtyard outside St. Bartholomew's. A new plaque had been installed beside the garden, engraved with Michael's name and a quote he had once loved from activist Dorothy Day. People say, "What is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time." Claire stood at the podium, tears in her eyes but a warm smile on her lips. She spoke softly yet passionately, thanking everyone for their support and announcing the establishment of the Michael Alderman Memorial Youth Scholarship. Applause rippled through the courtyard. Father Lawrence, leaning on a cane for support, offered a quiet blessing for the endeavor. Vincent stepped up next, clearing his throat. "Michael believed in building a better Glendale," he said, voice trembling with emotion. "He might not be here physically, but his spirit lives in the changes we make, in every act of kindness, every step toward justice." The crowd nodded in agreement. Then, in the front row, Rocky gave a single, confident bark, like an exclamation point at the end of Vincent's speech. Laughter and applause filled the courtyard. Even Father Lawrence managed a heartfelt chuckle. In that moment, Vincent felt a swell of pride, grief, and hope intermingled in his chest. He looked at Claire, who nodded, tears shining bright. Both of them knew that Michael's legacy was in their hands now, and they would not let it slip away. Over the following months, as the city's legal machinery clamped down on the corrupt ring, Vincent and Claire channeled their grief into action. They collaborated with local nonprofits to launch the Michael Alderman Community Center, where underprivileged kids could access tutoring programs, sports activities, and creative arts classes free of charge. A portion of Michael's savings, previously earmarked for wedding expenses, now became a seed fund to launch the scholarship. They were not alone in their efforts. Volunteers flocked to help after hearing the story. Father Lawrence, once fully recovered, organized monthly charity drives through St. Bartholomew's, collecting food, clothing, and school supplies for needy families. Rocky accompanied them on many of these missions, wagging his tail as he greeted children at the community center, serving as a lovable mascot. During quiet evenings, Vincent often found himself reflecting on his own transformation. Before Michael's death, he had been content working his regular job at a local hardware store, living day to day, never truly looking beyond his own small circle. Now, he felt a fire ignited within him, a desire to carry on Michael's philanthropic vision, to do more for others. to be the kind of person who stood for justice even when it was terrifying. This growth came with personal challenges, including nightmares about the rectory break-in, flashbacks to guns pointed at his head. Yet with each therapy session, each supportive conversation with Claire or Father Lawrence, Vincent learned to harness his trauma into empathy for others who had faced hardship. Pain became purpose. Claire, too, underwent a profound metamorphosis, where once she had planned to be a devoted wife, mother, and caretaker, now she found her calling as an advocate for marginalized communities. She dove into the scholarship work with zeal, forging partnerships with Glendale High School and the local community college, ensuring that deserving students had a path to higher education. And always, behind every planning meeting, every volunteer drive, every scholarship ceremony, the memory of Michael loomed, guiding them forward. He had believed in building something beautiful from the smallest of seeds, even if he never got to see those seeds flourish. His spirit lived on in their hearts and actions. Months after the funeral, Vincent decided to visit Michael's grave one more time. He needed closure, a chance to say goodbye properly. The morning was brisk, a gentle breeze stirring the dew-laden grass. The small headstone bore Michael's name, birth and death dates etched into the cold marble. Beside it lay fresh flowers, a bouquet from Claire. Vincent stood there, hands in his pockets, wrestling with the flood of emotions: sorrow, gratitude, admiration. Rocky sat by his side, gazing at the headstone as if he too understood the weight of the moment. "Hey, buddy," Vincent said softly, addressing the grave. "It's been a while. We're doing our best to honor you. Claire, Father Lawrence, and me. The scholarship's up and running. The community center's helping a lot of kids. I wish you were here to see it. I wish you were here to see how you changed us all." He paused, wiping a stray tear. "I miss you, man. But I promise, we won't let your dream die." Rocky let out a low whimper, pressing his nose to the base of the headstone. Vincent knelt beside him, placing a hand on the dog's fur. In that quiet moment, an overwhelming sense of peace washed over him, as if Michael's presence lingered in the gentle rustling of the leaves overhead. When Vincent finally stood, his heart felt lighter, not free of pain, but filled with acceptance and resolve. "Let's go, Rocky," he murmured. "We've got work to do." They walked out of the graveyard, the sun rising higher in the Glendale sky, illuminating a city that was slowly mending its fractures. And though Michael was gone, his legacy blossomed in each step Vincent and Claire took toward building a more compassionate, just world. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through grief, courage, and renewal. We explored a story where one faithful dog's bark uncovered hidden truths, where a nervous priest carried secrets that could topple the powerful, and where the legacy of one devoted man inspired an entire community to find hope and justice. If this tale touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with friends who need a reminder that compassion can triumph over darkness, and justice can flourish even in the most challenging circumstances. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that spotlight the strength of the human and sometimes canine spirit. Your support helps us continue to create meaningful content that celebrates resilience, connection, and personal growth. Until next time, remember that even in life's darkest hours, a single act of courage can spark enduring change.